look to support, network and develop the third sector, apologies for the old terminology, chief executives. We have about 2,000 members, and they range from some of the large national household names such as Barnardo's, Action for Children, Red Cross, all the way down to very small local voluntary sector organisations. So in terms of trying to just describe the sector, it is a surprisingly large economic force. It turns over well over £100 billion pounds a year. It employs approximately 1.6 million people with access to approximately 40% of the UK adult population that volunteer at least once a year. So we're talking of a very, very significant economic force. However, at the same time, it only delivers about 2% of UK's public services. That's grown particularly in the last 10 or so years fairly rapidly. These are mostly around the fringes of the public service spectrum, working particularly with the hardest help and the hardest to reach. What we've found in particular is that with those client groups, the sector can often deliver more effectively, more efficiently, designing services particularly around the service user, drawing together different funding streams, different funding pots, working with different agencies to deliver what is effectively a holistic service to the service user, which turns out in the long run to be very cost effective. To take purely one example, for time purposes' sake, there's an organisation called St Giles Trust which works with priority and prolific offenders, running a scheme called Through the Gates, which was evaluated very recently, found to save £10, at least £10 for every £1 invested in the scheme, which is a way of peer mentoring, effectively. People who are recently released from prison, they are met at the gates by an ex-offender that has worked with St Giles Trust before, trained up to be this mentor, then finds the ex-offender a place to live, helps them register with their GP, register with a job centre, etc. With the cost of reoffending being approximately £11 billion to the public purse, these kind of savings, I think, have the great potential to be mainstreamed very effectively and try and help realise some of the savings that are needed over the coming few years. So in terms of bringing it back to the partnership perspective that the conference is about, I suppose really with our members there are two main types of partnership, I would suggest. Particularly in public service delivery, there's the revenue partnership, which is where organisations either cross-sector or within the sector can come together to deliver the services, maybe playing on each other's strengths, leveraging their knowledge. This can be, I suppose, within the sector there is an example called 3SC, which was set up very recently, which is a consortium of several hundred third sector organisations working in the welfare to work spectrum, which has proven to be very successful. Cross-sector, for example, there is Turning Point and Catch-22 with Serco now working in prisons to deliver services. These are all very effective ways of being able to play off each other's strengths. Secondly, I would argue most importantly in the minute for the sector is capacity building partnerships. Again, these can be within the sector or cross-sector, but this is about helping access funding pots. It's about upskilling the sector and trying to share capacity, really. So I think those are the main ways that really the sector will need to look to enable it to meet the challenges that the current administration is looking to drive through it. If I could end maybe with three quick challenges. I suppose to try and meet these expectations, there are three key challenges that I see. There's a challenge for government, which is in terms of being able to mainstream some of this best practice through empowering and enabling commissioners and freeing them up to to commission the kind of services that they want to commission. I would argue there's a challenge for funders in the sense that the sector is historically and currently very undercapitalised. Over a third of charities have basically no operational reserves. As a result, the movement to particularly payment by results is proving to be, or could prove to be, very problematic. There are some interesting new methods of financing which are happening at the minute, such as the social impact bond and the use of quasi-equity, which is quite an exciting development. But these need to be brought out further. And also there's a challenge to the sector as well. The sector needs to get better at demonstrating its impact. There is a lot of work being done at the minute, but this needs to be brought out to really show the benefits of working with the sector and through the sector.
Thank you very much for that explanation of the voluntary sector and how that plays into efficiency in public services. Now I'd like to ask Matthew Jaffa from FSB to give us his thoughts.
Sure. Okay. Well, on behalf of the FSB, we're here in a slightly different capacity talking about procurement opportunities within small businesses. The FSB itself represents 210,000 small businesses, in the majority being micro businesses with fewer than 10 employees. And it's interesting to know that of all businesses across the UK, 99.3% of all businesses are in fact small businesses. So we represent businesses crossing all sectors. But an interesting statistic is that approximately only about 11% of contracts won through the public sector actually go to small businesses, which is a worrying statistic when we compare it to our EU counterparts, where there's a much greater amount of contracts going to SMEs. And our own statistics show and research show that small businesses rarely or never bid for public sector contracts. There's a barrier to actual awareness of these contracts. And a lot of businesses tell us that the public sector is in fact harder to deliver for due to things like the formality of the process, the lack of responsiveness and the actual timescales of what a small business has to go through to actually win the contract. And it's also due to the fact that large businesses have the bid writing capacity, whereas a small micro business doesn't have that. So from figures, the public sector spends about 220 billion on procuring goods and services, and of that 42 billion is through local authorities, so it's a substantial amount. But from our particular ICM FSB survey work of our members, of the 41% of businesses who procure from the public sector, 65% procure through local authorities, but only 29% procure through central departments and their agencies. So there's quite a discrepancy there. But the point we want to get across is that public procurement, in particular public sector procurement, can provide an opportunity for growth in small businesses, and that's particularly important during these very difficult times. Small businesses are going to lead us back to recovery, and procurement offers a fantastic opportunity. Local businesses are the heart of the community, and the statistics show for every £1 spent in the local community, 50 to 70p goes back into the local community, whether it be through jobs, apprenticeships, or goods and services. It's all kept within the local community, and it builds that local environment. And one of the points we want to get across is that I know the theme of the conference being efficiency, but it's not necessarily that efficiency always leads there's a better efficiency through large businesses interacting through better tracks. It's not necessarily the best option. So we want to ensure that local suppliers also get that option to provide what they think is a more efficient service. So in small businesses who are procuring the contracts, you'll get that better quality of service, that face-to-face contact, the better knowledge of the local environment, the money, as we said, stays in the local economy, and it's actually good for the carbon footprint as well. Asda being a fantastic example of a company, big, large company, who work through small businesses to actually procure the local food supplies locally, which works very, very well through that supply chain. So government needs to be robust in how they are pushing through the message that local authorities should interact more with small and micro businesses. The adoption of the new standard pre-qualification questionnaire, great example. We're fully supportive of that. We want to ensure that small businesses who do fill out PQ, you don't need to do it for another central government or local government contract. It should be there as a standard contract form already filled out. Feedback's important as well for small businesses to know why maybe they haven't been successful, what they could do to ensure they win maybe a contract next time. And we also call on central government to be maybe slightly less risk-averse, particularly in terms of bureaucracy. And a great example that I just finished on is a local business speaking to us that they wanted to procure an IT contract worth £25,000, but yet they were asked to fill in a £5 million professional indemnity insurance. They had to fill out 72 pages of the health and safety forms, which would have taken 2 days for them to fill out. And like I say, without those specialised bid teams in their workforce, it's very likely they'll bid, if at all they'll ever win those bids. So that's just a short synopsis from the small business angle.
Thank you very much. So, having looked at the voluntary sector and small businesses, we're now going to hear from Russell Green of PCCL.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, and thank you all for attending. I hope you had an easier journey here than I did down from Edinburgh, but it's pleased for me to be here, and nice to see you all. I am the Managing Director of PCCL. We provide consultancy and software products exclusively to a variety of Visa customers. My own background is in procurement. I used to be the purchasing manager of Stirling Council, and in 1997 I introduced the use of Visa purchasing at the Council. We gave the cards to our housing and road repairs team to go and buy low-value repair materials. At the time, we were tasked with ensuring that we were providing best value. And through a series of benchmark exercises that I carried out, I was able to prove that Visa purchasing definitely offered best value for the procurement and payment of these types of goods. That was in 1997, and it seems like a lifetime ago, but the challenges facing the public sector procurement are as much real today as they were then. Today we have a lot of developed software technology. The web's obviously expanded greatly. You saw our eSolutions product being used by BIS there. And I hope I can answer your questions today regarding using technology with Visa purchasing to help you to achieve these efficiency targets that we're all looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final presentation, before we throw it open to questions, is from Bruce Sullivan, who needs no introduction because we heard him earlier on. Bruce.
And I promise not to take up too much more of your time on this. I do want to make a comment, a remark regarding what Ian was talking to you. And basically, before he got off the stage, he said, you know, change is not going to happen unless you, as the public servant, you have the duties and responsibilities in your position. You're the only one that can really affect change. You know, they say that the only person that's receptive to change is a baby in diapers. And that's what you're facing because you're trying to create efficiencies in your jobs. In the U.S., when we had to implement acquisition changes, and cards was a significant change in the acquisition process, we had what I refer to as the perfect storm. Have you seen that movie, The Perfect Storm? You know, the weather was just right, the barometer was just right, the winds were just right, and it created a storm of the century. Well, at the time we were looking at acquisition reform in the U.S., three other things happening. One, Congress was trying to get the government to work smarter, faster, be a smaller government for the taxpayer. So we had pressure coming from the legislative branch, Congress. We also had pressure coming from the executive branch, the president, Vice President Gore was reinventing government. So he was pushing from the top. We had support from Congress, and we had the users, the people who are actually doing the work, were tired of doing it ineffectively and inefficiently. They were demanding change. What we had was management in the middle typically getting in the way of that. But with the push from top down, bottom up, and then the support from Congress, it worked. And I would only hope that you find the same support in affecting efficiencies within your program yourself. Thanks.
Thank you. So, the topic of the discussion is using partners to generate efficiency. I think that the first thing I'll do while you're all formulating your questions is to ask a question to Nick. And you explained and you gave some examples of partnership working and you gave different categories. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about capacity building partnerships, because that sounds, particularly if you're delivering better for less, building capacity seems a particularly fruitful avenue.
Very much so. I mean, there are lots lots of different examples of it coming from the public sector perspective. I suppose the most important one has been the Change Up programme, which the Cabinet Office issued, which combined capacity builders and future builders and sectors as funds for building the success of the then third sector. What we're really looking at now, though, is a more nuanced approach to capacity building. It's not just about funding, it's about skills as well. So particularly many of our members have been looking to work very closely with lots of private sector organisations. Macquarie Look has been a great example, having several thousand employees in its London office, each with different areas of specialisation. They've gone into their localities to work with third sector organisations, particularly help around bid writing, help with cash flow management, help with IT systems, which all help drive efficiencies within the third sector organisations. From a Kivo perspective, which focuses on leadership, we're working currently with BT and the NHS Leaders Programme to work on cross-sector mentoring programmes, helping some of our chief executives join up with their peers in the private sector and the public sector.
Do we have questions from the floor? Obviously still reflecting on the issues here. In that case, let me ask another question to the panel. In view of Ian Watmore's comments on the reflections that we had from the audience at the beginning of the session in terms of most efficiency coming from cross-government, but also potentially cross-sector working. How do you see the mechanisms for delivering that particular efficiency developing? Where do you think we are now in terms of the interface between public service and potential partners and providers? And how do you think that can be improved to accelerate the partnership and the releasing of the efficiencies that it could make? And perhaps if I could start with you from on small business perspective.
I think from our perspective, I think it's more a culture change that is needed. I mean, we have looked at working closely with colleagues in BIS and the Treasury as well, getting them to come to speak at various focus groups events that the FSB run, for instance, to actually talk firsthand to actual micro business owners to see exactly what issues they interface on a day-to-day basis and the difficulties, whether it be a third of their team who are involved with writing of a bid, what resources and demands that puts on the rest of the business, for instance. So it's having that real understanding. And we've looked at working with BIS and working on things like reforming the culture of Whitehall in terms of how they impose regulations on business. So it's not a bad thing if we can look at developing how from source to the actual bid itself goes to get to the bottom line, how that process can be made easier for micro businesses to actually engage at different points, or small businesses at different points. Again, just necessarily have to think of by ways of public sector cuts having to be brought in, that we need to make efficiency savings, that everything has to be gone, just run through large businesses. So in effect, it's maybe just developing a bit of a shift in culture across Whitehall.
Russell, from a different perspective, hearing this discussion from these two particular sectors and Ian's comments, what's your view on this?
Well, I feel that there's a lot of efficiencies that we can gain from the data that we already have. We ourselves are a small business and a member of the FSB. And we are asked by our customers, a lot of them in the public sector, to send invoices to them. Some people want a paper invoice, some want a PDF, some want an XML schema. And we're fortunate that as a small business involved in this industry, we've got the technicians that can provide our customers with these invoices in these various formats. I also hasten to add that we are a Visa merchant and we can accept card payment at line item detail. Now, I feel that if it's possible for government to create a standard invoice template that could be used in conjunction with Visa purchasing. I think having that data in a standard format would enable a lot of efficiencies to be achieved, because you've got ordering systems such as Oracle and SAP that can deliver out the order data in a standard format. Therefore, if it can be matched to the invoice data, this would save an awful lot of manual tasks that are being done, checking off invoices against orders at the moment. So I think it might be an idea for government to consider some sort of mandate that they can accept invoices from suppliers in a standard format. I also think it would be a good idea, and I'm not just saying here because Visa are supporting this event, but really, why would you want paper invoices, etc., for invoices of a value, say, of £50 or even £250, when it's going to cost you about £45 to process that manually, when you can pay the supplier by card in a few days and help their cash flow? So I think standardising the invoice and perhaps considering some sort of mandate on the use of card payment for certain types of invoices, I think would save a lot of money. Certainly was the case at Stirling Council. We saved quite a considerable amount of money when we introduced the cards.
That's a very practical suggestion. And perhaps, Bruce, I can turn to you to ask whether there are any practical suggestions for accelerating the pace at which we can get efficiencies that we can learn from the US.
Well, we had to face a lot of the same challenges you face today, but we're making headway today. Where we see a lot of change is dispersing benefits within the U.S. Take, for example, some of the disasters that happened in the U.S. Hurricane Rita, where Louisiana was underwater. Several hurricanes along the East Coast, tornadoes in the West. What happens to the beneficiary of their Social Security payment or child welfare payment if they're an unbanked individual? In the U.S., there's over 8 million people, adults, that are unbanked, no banks at all. So they rely on checks, they text the checks, and then with the check they go pay check cashing fees, which can be 10%. Right? If these people are displaced, how are they going to get the mail? They won't. They won't get the mail, they won't get their checks, they won't get anything else. So in the U.S., we've actually been working with Treasury and Social Security to provide these people. We give them a choice. We can give you a card which you will get your payment automatically placed on that card every month, or whatever the payment frequency is. Regardless of where you are, you're going to continue to get that payment. So there's a benefit to the citizen in this particular case in doing so, because if they are displaced, the money goes with them. We don't have to rely on postal service, canceled or stolen checks or anything else. You can look at it from the perspective of the citizen. They are benefiting from it. At the same time, you look at government, they're eliminating the cost of generating checks and regenerating checks that are lost and stolen. It ranges anywhere from $1 to $6 a check. And when there are millions of checks being sent out every month, that's a lot of money that the government can save. But they're saving it not just for the sake of saving money within government, but actually being more effective for the citizen in this particular case. So we've seen a lot of movement in disbursements this way in the U.S. First at the state level. Much more of this happened at the state level, but it's starting to happen today at the central government level.
I like that example because it is an example of doing things better with less rather than doing more for less, which I think is absolutely in tune with what Ian was talking about earlier on. I guess from the voluntary sector, there may be some changes that you would like to see that would accelerate the efficiencies government, because some of the examples you gave were about efficiencies in the voluntary sector. Of course, the audience in this room are interested in how the efficiencies in public services can also be achieved by working with the voluntary sector. I wonder if you could give another example of where there's been efficiencies in public sector and in the voluntary sector.
Well, I think the best example to draw on here is probably that of Total Place. When the evaluation came out in the budget earlier this year, I think for every there was a saving £1 in every 3, I think, by joining up services. And this is something that charities, voluntary sector organisations, third sector organisations, social enterprises, whatever you want to call them, have been doing for years and years. And that's one of the main reasons why we are very frequently one of the most cost-effective and efficient providers, particularly if you're looking at long-term savings. I mean, there is a service, going for another example, I'm afraid, Ad Action provide a service called Breaking the Cycle to families whose parents abuse drugs. That service is a 7-month service that costs about £1,800. Looking at the savings to the taxpayer over 2 generations, it's almost up to £900,000 just for one family. So this kind of very effective provision, as Ian said earlier, it's about a complete reformulation of what public services are, which I think will drive long-term savings as well.
Thank you. A very good example there. Now we have some questions from the floor. Gentleman here and then gentleman there. I'm sorry, I can't read your name tags from this distance.
Hello, I was just wondering, just to follow on.
Who you are?
Sorry, I'm Ben Wood from MOJ. I was just wondering to follow on from that last point that you made. What is the capacity of voluntary and similar organisations to upscale activity to a level sufficient to be able to meet the demand that the public sector has to kind of engage and deliver the services that it needs to deliver?
One question at a time? Okay. Very good point. The capacity, I think, is there. I think a lot of it will revolve around the crucial role that infrastructure will have to play over the coming couple of years, which I think, the Cabinet Office is currently out for consultation on infrastructure, but there is undoubtedly a very critical role in trying to help organisations scale up. A lot of it, I think, will be trying to get organisations to work together more, joining up services. Whether it's kind of natural upscaling is always a tricky point. There are a number of different barriers that exist in the public service market to voluntary sector providers at the minute, particularly around irrecoverable VAT and TUPE, which we're working very hard on to try and level the playing field on that front. There are some very innovative financing mechanisms out there, as I discussed earlier. I mean, I'm particularly keen on seeing private sector money come in to help the sector upscale. But I think the capacity is there. I think it just needs to be released, and I think that can be done both through the private sector and through the public sector, trying to free up the kind of innovation that does exist out there.
Thank you. As that was a very specific question, I'm not going to throw it over to the panel, but to take the next question.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Rob Murphy, Home Office. My question focuses around the point that Matthew made earlier regarding the public sector being risk averse. It is something I've heard of quite a few times from previous conferences, and there is one thing I think is that there needs to be a recognition of the reasons why the public sector is often risk averse, and I think one of them is the reputational damage that often results if something goes wrong. I mean, everyone, both private sector and the voluntary sector, face potential damage if something goes wrong, and particularly, say, if something is not delivered, or if money, or more seriously, if money is lost and can't be recovered. But for the public sector, as many people will have seen, if money is wasted or lost, have a look at some of the press coverage of MOD procurement contracts, particularly on military equipment, and it's happened both sides of the Atlantic as well. the damage on the reputation of public sector organisations is immense. You will have press, the press going on about it often day in, day out, and there will be demands for action, heads to roll. This must never happen again. Heard it so many times. I was wondering what the panel think that their respective sectors, can do to help the public sector become less risk averse, and say whether what can be done. For example, could an approach be if shared acceptance of risk or anything else that comes to mind?
That's a good question. Should we start off with FSB, since that was the...
Yeah, sure. I mean, totally agree with your points. And I suppose that case I brought up earlier with winning a £25,000 contract, you had to have £5 million of professional indemnity insurance just to be able to bid for it. That's just not, beneficial to any side. But I do agree there maybe has to be a bit of meeting in the middle somewhere. I think if public sector could be less risk averse and actually go through the process of maybe cutting back in terms of health and safety requirements, for instance, that we've been calling for some time. Maybe small businesses can do their bit. I mean, we've always said that apprenticeships should be through the procurement chain, for instance. So whereas, if you want to bid for a contract, maybe you have to have an active apprenticeship within you, or take on an apprentice just to demonstrate that kind of thing. Maybe there's somewhere that can meet in the middle, that for a small business to win a public procurement contract, then a partnership can be developed with the National Apprenticeship Service to enable that business to take on an apprentice to carry out, to help with that contract bid and stuff. So that there is an element there of working on both sides. But I do feel we do need to cut back on this whole admin burden aspect of things like health and safety that you've mentioned, and indemnity insurance, that is a major problem for small businesses.
Bruce, would you like to add a perspective?
I can tell you a little story. When I was responsible for the Defense Department's program, we had a very vocal Senator Grassley, that kept looking and sending out the auditors looking for purchase card or travel card misuse. He held a hearing one year. I was a guy who had to stand up and go to Congress and sit before them and listen to him read out 6 examples of card misuse within the Defense Department. One of them was an individual, an employee, buying his girlfriend breast implants. You can't respond to something like that. They had 6 examples out of 10 million transactions. But what was in the Washington Post the next day was the one on breast implants, and not about the 9 million good ones. It was about that one bad one, and it does damage reputations and individuals. And I started getting pressure from up above me saying, hey, is it that bad? I mean, that these things happen. And there was a move to become more risk adverse. I think what we saw in the U.S. is not a retraction of the programs, but we didn't see any growth after that. We weren't seeing people willing to take a chance to use a card in another area, afraid that some cardholder is going to misuse it. There will be misuse. The objective is management of risk, not avoidance of risk. Senator Grassley would rather spend $1,000 to save $10. You can't conduct any business, whether that's private business or public service, that way. You have to manage risk. So you need to ask yourself, do I have the tools within my business processes to afford me internal controls? Are my internal controls such that I have confidence in the program that it's working good at an acceptable level? There still will be something's going to happen sometime, but can you convince management that that's the unordinary action? Most of it is good. One of the first things we did, myself and the individual I work with at Visa in the U.S., he came from the DoD purchase card program. He actually got more criticism than I did. I was managing the purchase card. He was managing the travel card, which was individually billed travel, by the way. which means the individual got the bill, had to pay their own bill. They get reimbursed by the government. The number of sightings for these people misusing their card was amazing. The case I mentioned about the breast implants, he paid his bill, he paid timely. In fact, we got a rebate on it, right? So, I mean, to us, we could have said it was good, but it really wasn't. We looked at the next competition coming up, and we said, what is it that the agencies, what do we wish we had when we had to appear before Congress and justify our programs? And one thing I wish I had was the capability of going back to Senator Grassley and say, I can say with 99% confidence that less than 1% of my transactions are questionable. And that's statistical sampling. So one of the things Steve and I did, worked with our product folks in the U.S. to build what we call Visa Intelligent Compliance Module. It does automatically, it's web-based, it does, I'm not selling this, we don't sell it, the banks sell it. But anyway, it does the statistical sampling that gives you the confidence level. We see it not as a way of identifying misuse, we see it as a way of justifying that the job is working and working well and moving on. And I think that's the whole thing. If your internal controls are tight, we should be managing risk. And with that, I'm going to stop.
Thank you. Russell, do you want to add anything?
That's a very good question, because when I went to put the cards in at Stirling Council, I discovered that there was no other local authority or any other public sector body that I could refer to find out how they overcame the likes of the financial regs and standing orders. So I had quite a job persuading the councillors about giving tradesmen the purchasing cards, because they feared that they were going to be on the front page of the Scotsman, where someone had booked a flight to Bali or a breast implant, as the case may be. But actually, I worked very closely with the auditors over the next year to prove that the process we had for procuring goods and for paying invoices was a lot more riskier than using these Visa purchasing cards. And Joe Rennie, who was the auditor, became my greatest ally because he could get the information instantly. It was very clear who had made the purchase, what they had purchased, etc. And for him as an auditor, it provided a very clear and very quick audit trail, which he became a great advocate of the purchasing card. And I would ask, like I used to go on a Monday into Stirling Council, and because of my job, I had a limit that I could sign orders or invoices to. And I go in on the Monday and there'd be a pile of requisitions on this side of the desk and a pile of invoices on that side of the desk. And I'll put my hand up and say that I did not look at every single thing on either those orders or invoices. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the risk here really under these circumstances? At least with the card, you can see what's been purchased, and if it is a fraudulent transaction, you can even get your money back. You couldn't do that with a paper invoice. So I would say using the card helps you to reduce the risk. It certainly makes it easier to find anyone that's doing something like that.
Thank you very much. And to Nick, I guess the question is, how do people cope with getting over this question in their own minds that might exist of the risk of doing business with the voluntary sector?
Well, just picking up on what Bruce said, I couldn't agree more. It is about risk management rather than risk avoidance. Looking at the kind of scale of the cuts that we're facing now, I don't think we're going to be able to see such a transformation if we are going to just purely avoid risk. It'll be about trying to manage it. I think the key question that needs to be asked as well, certainly in policy terms, with a localist and a personalised agenda, though, is how the level of assurance can be maintained when decisions are then being pushed down to the individual and neighbourhood levels. I think that's going to be a key question for government over the coming couple of years. I mean, personalisation has already been a subject of quite a lot of press coverage, particularly around social care budgets, where I think one service user decided to spend all of his budget on a season ticket to a football team. Is that a good use of public money? I think it rather depends on what your view of public service is. So I think those will be some key questions that need to be answered over the coming couple of years, particularly around regulation as well. I think the outcome of the BIS regulation task force will be critical. Akivo performed a regulation review a couple of months ago, and I would thoroughly urge everyone to have a look at it. It's an excellent document, given I was part of the team.
I think a key determinant of the success of all of this will be when, as is inevitably the case, when there's a programme of major change, there is an issue, and I'm not saying it would be in the voluntary sector, it could be in any area where services are being devolved out to communities and something goes wrong, or there is a very big difference between the quality of services in one part of the country to another part of the country. And when that becomes really transparent, the big test will be what the centre does. Because if the centre immediately reacts in a very centralist way, that sends a very different message than if it says, we trust you to sort this out over time. And that will be a key determinant of how the plans develop and whether the cultural change really embeds. I think we have time for one last question to the panel. I saw this lady here. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not having tunnel vision. I've got two lights here, so I apologise if I've ignored anyone in the periphery. But I did see the lady there first.
Hi, this is Sandra Marcantonio, Criminal Justice Reform Directorate within the Ministry of Justice. I have this real itching for a scheme to take off, and I'm really not sure how it could be organised. And I'm looking mainly to Russell and Nick, maybe, to say yes, that's a good idea, or no, that's absolutely ridiculous. That will never take off. And looking at prisons, we're at maximum capacity at the moment, and it's really expensive to send people to prison, and Ian touched on that earlier. And certainly, quite a lot of people believe that only the most dangerous of people should be in prison and the rest should be rehabilitated. We're also looking at mass unemployment at the moment, where we've got almost 3 million people unemployed and only about 500,000 vacancies. We've also got a problem with the shortage of social housing. And I was just wondering whether it was possible to, with the Ministry of Justice and maybe DWP, to have a scheme whereby people didn't go to prison, but they lost their liberty, whether that be on tags. They were employed on housing projects alongside unemployed builders, plasterers, carpenters, whatever, who would pass their skills on to those people. Those people would continue to receive benefit whilst they were unemployed skilled tradesmen, but maybe with a premium that could be administered by maybe a voluntary sector organisation that oversaw the whole thing. And also then you had a consortium of housing associations or maybe the local authority whereby they could maybe, I know we don't want any spend to save, maybe we could buy a stock of housing if there is a stock of housing available, whether that could then be converted into flats, living accommodation, whether all those derelict houses could be renovated, and then the housing associations then gave those back to the local authority, or indeed kept them as their own stock and rented them at a reasonable rent, and thereby the amount that you're not paying private landlords would then cover the cost of the whole system of renovation and the premium to the skilled workers that were working alongside the offenders. It's a really pie in the sky idea, but I just felt that it was something that could work and it would benefit all three outfits, but it does require cross-government agreement, I suppose. Do you think that's something that could work, or is it a completely ridiculous idea? And if you did think it would work, how would you progress that idea?
Right. Well, that's a very specific question. We're going to take headlines from each of our panellists, and then I suggest you all get together over coffee, because it sounds like a detailed, specific discussion. But here we have an issue, a very ambitious and very all-encompassing plan, which requires a lot of different sectors all to work together. So how would the Ministry of Justice get this going? Nick.
It's very simple, really. I thoroughly agree with you. Those three interrelated issues are almost self-perpetuating in many respects. There are a number of organisations which I know of that currently work across, particularly around employing offenders. The most notable one being Blue Sky, which I think is a derivation of Groundwork, and they have shown very strong successes in terms of getting offenders back into the job market and moving them away from the revolving door cycle. How would you progress it? It is. I think that needs a little further thought on my part. I have to admit, maybe a couple of minutes over coffee wouldn't be a bad idea. But I agree with your points on housing stock. Interesting to see how that would play against some of the notions in the Green Paper that came out yesterday, as regards trying to open up some of the private stock currently and using public funding to place offenders in there as well. Let me get back to you once the other panellists have answered.
Now, Matthew, isn't this just going to take the bread out of the small businesses' mouths?
Well, can I plead the fifth on this one? From our perspective, the only real answer I can give at the moment, I've got various case studies of members who actively take on offenders, people who have come out, but depending on severity, of course, and having regular checks with local services that everything, the checks are all there and stuff. I mean, there's potential there. I think so. But I suppose it all forms a part of the work programme that the government's starting to churn out. And we're looking for, working with different partners, maybe through people like A4E. I know PwC are looking at areas like this as well. So I think they're looking to bid for different parts of the work programme. So probably, from our perspective, to work with them in association with them might be the best approach for us, if that's an answer.
Thank you. Bruce, is there anything...
Well, Ian's already told you all not to look at the way the U.S. is doing it, since we have more prisoners housed than North Korea, I think he said. So I'll pass on this one.
Thank you. Russell, would you like
Thanks,
to
Shane.
add?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea, actually. I, like the rest of the panel, I've no idea how it could work, but I've got an 18-year-old son that can't get an apprenticeship, even though I've offered to pay companies to take him on as an apprentice, and the waiting list in our area is 7 years for a council house if he wanted to get on that list. So anything that can improve that, and I'm sure there are people in prison for minor offences, say, that have skills such as trade skills that could be passed on. So I think it's an excellent idea. I've no idea, however, how it could work, and I don't know how I could assist in terms of card payment technology, but I do think it's a very good idea. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, panel. Some excellent questions from the floor, and I think you'll all agree that we covered a very wide range of different topics over that session. Thank you all very much indeed. And now we're going to have the refreshment break, and I'd be pleased if you could all be back here by a quarter past 12, please.
Tells me your heart's been broken before. The way you touch my hand, so gentle and sweet. Exciting is a thought of when our bodies meet and explore. I know it's not real. I know it's not real. me.